The North Chamber. It has many names as well. It's the House of the Forest of the Cedar of Lebanon. In the Gospels and the book of Acts, it's called Solomon's Porch, or Stoa in the Greek. And we are very, very excited to share with you this message on the North Chamber. Okay, the scriptures talk a great deal about the temple. They talk a little bit about the king's house as well, and we also get some references to this other facility. Okay, it did exist in the time of the first temple, but it exists as well in a slightly different form in the millennial temple. Okay, so we're going to discuss what it is you just saw in the intro of the video. You could see, if you paid attention, the boiling pots, okay, the furnace, and the kitchens, all right? And obviously, in that rendering, we are highlighting two things on the interior of the building. That is the places for the priests to lay their garments and the places where the priests eat. Okay, so we have sections that we're going to reference. One is called the lattice. And Song of Solomon says the king looks out through the lattice, and then it says, this is Song of Solomon chapter 2, he has taken me to the banqueting house. So just for terms, when we look at the 3D model, we took the wood section, we're calling that the lattice section, and then the white section, kind of painted white on the exterior, that is the banqueting tables with the long tables, okay? So that's a little bit. We'll get into the model. We're going to get into the prophetic significance of what it is we're looking at with this building and building the interior of it to the instructions that Ezekiel gives us. But we do need to take a look at the history of this building going back. We're even approaching the 9th month, and the 9th month is the time period of Hanukkah. And it was in the Feast of Hanukkah, Feast of Dedication in John chapter 10, where Christ went into Solomon's Stoa, or Solomon's Porch. Okay, so that was the facility that Solomon had built. According to Josephus, it did actually survive the various destructions, and Christ went into that. Now, we believe the significance there is Song of Solomon in the first temple. He also built a throne, not in the temple but outside, and that may have been connected to the Solomon Stoa, feature of which is the columns, of course, and we're going to see the importance of seeing those columns in the Ezekiel temple as well. So a couple buildings, this one, the North Chamber, and the Scribe's Chamber, they existed in the first temple in a different form. So they existed in a form of a building with a roof, and the interior was filled with columns, okay? Then in the Ezekiel temple, there are columns, but the building is built into actually a structure of full walls and enclosed building and structure. So that's what we see with the North Chamber and South Chamber. When we say North Chamber, South Chamber, they're basically two identical buildings that are right next to the temple. And the what we call the Scribe's Chamber, it as well becomes a building, but in the first temple, it was basically a building filled with pillars. Okay, well, anyway, what we want to do is, in this video, cover everything, cover the information that went into the layout that you saw. We want to cover the message. Okay, there is a message in every building. There is a parabolic message. We had talked about it before, and that is the wedding supper. Of course, this building is the building of the wedding supper of the great feast, as you could see, with the feature of lots of tables. In our model, guys, the number of chairs that we could fit through this example, we're not saying it looks exactly like this, but we could fit 2,400 people in one building, and there's two buildings, just to give you an idea of the numbers if you're interested. Okay, so let's now take a close look, very important look at how we came to the measurements. Okay, this is important. Ezekiel doesn't tell us, as we showed you in the previous video, Ezekiel doesn't tell us the height. Okay, so he gives us, okay, its length is this, its width is this, but he doesn't say, okay, the height is so many cubits. All right, remember that. That doesn't come into play with all the buildings, actually, including the temple. He doesn't say the height. So what that means is we must go back to the first temple and look at the instructions in the House of David, the first temple model, which contributes to the information we need in the Ezekiel temple. Okay, so you know how I like to show you guys how the place I'm saying reflects some of the architecture of the temple. Here you can see it in that it is 3 stories. So just like the north and south chambers have 3 levels to them, 3 stories, here you can see a lower level, like a basement. Here you can see the second level, and then up above you see the 3rd level. So yes, this place as well reflects the north and south chambers in that it has the 3 levels. Now let's take a look at the first temple complex first. You can see in a previous message titled 72 Pillars in the Temple, Solomon's Porch, we talk about the house of the forest of Lebanon. Length 100 cubits, width 50 cubits, height 30 cubits. So this is the information we're getting and applying here. And here he details rows of columns that are built up inside the facility. So that's this section here where it's 100 by 50. Same exact as the north chamber, as we'll see in Ezekiel. And what we're doing is we're assuming, we don't know exactly, but if another facility called the Porch of the Pillars were next to it, it would have 12 pillars. This one has 60, and then there would be a throne as well that is detailed in 1 Kings, representing the judgment seat of Christ. Okay, so the design here we are applying to the Ezekiel temple in the north chamber, all right, where you have the rows of cedar pillars and it's covered with cedar above the beams. So these are kind of cedar panels, which you saw in the intro of the video. Now here's our sketch of the north chamber, and what we've done is taken 2 rows of columns that we saw in the original design of the House of the Forest, or Solomon's Porch as it's called, and then what we have is we actually have a portion that is woodwork inside that we described as the lattice, and then we have the other portion we call the banquet, which is more of a plaster white finish in the buildings. But it's really important that we understand that there is a thickness to the wall of 5 cubits, so that when we actually look at the building from the side view here, not all of it is space that is occupied because the walls take up a lot of space. Okay, so there you can see the wall on either side, and that thus forms the inner structure of the building. And then we have within the building the lattice work and the woodwork paneling and the wood columns, or stoa. You can see Ezekiel 42 verses 3 and 6, it says stoa. So there are in fact columns in this center section. Now if we take this sketch and we turn it upside down, something very interesting happens, where basically we have the 3 rows, the 3 stories of the building, and here the bottom level, this is 14 cubits here. This distance here to here, 14 cubits. This distance here to here is 12. This distance here to here is 10. Now we knew this was the right measurement because we got a couple confirmations. First off, Ezekiel does not say exactly what the different stories are. He just says that there's three stories and that they are different length. All right, and we'll read that. We'll show it to you. But we are confident of this for two reasons. Number one, if you look very closely here and look at the proportions of what we're looking at, something amazing happens. And what's amazing is this. The proportions and sizes of the north chamber share dimensions of the temple. So the temple has chambers inside it, and what you're looking at is a side view of the temple, and this is the holy place, and inside the holy place up above there are three stories of chambers. Okay, just like there's three stories in the north chamber, here you can see that there are three levels, and you can see they share the same proportions, where there's 7 cubits, 6 cubits, and 5 cubits on each of the stories. So this is one of our confirmations that we're in the same proportions of the chambers in the north and south chambers as those in the temple. Our other confirmation comes by Ezekiel time. If you remember our previous video, we looked at how the book of Ezekiel, how the record of prophecy Ezekiel details, he records the year, month, and day of all the prophecy. So here is the years, the months, and the days. Now, we begin to realize that the same order of what he's describing in these numbers relates to buildings and facilities in the temple. And here you can see we have NS chambers, so this video is talking about the north and south chambers. And remember how we showed you that there are different levels, and those levels have different measurements. Well, those measurements are in the year, month, and day of the latter chapters of Ezekiel. So Ezekiel 33:21, it's year 12, month 10, day 5. Well, 12 is the number of cubits in our center level. 10 cubits, all right, we have 2 tens, and that is the upper and highest chamber. And then we have a 14, and that is the number of cubits in the lowest chamber or room. And we also have a 1. This represents the way. There's a way in the passageway of only 1 cubit. We see a 5. 5 relates to the 5 cubits that we talked about in the thickness of the wall. And we have another 10. And this 10 is going to relate to the walkway that is running inside the building. So in Ezekiel, the top layer is 10 cubits. The middle is 12. The bottom is 14. And we have confirmation of that right here in the Ezekiel year, month, day, okay, numbers. We have another video where we talked about that, but now what we're going to do is as we go through each one of these, you can see we had talked about the temple porch, and in the temple porch we have many of the measurements. And then we had just mentioned in this video the temple chambers, okay, and we showed you those chambers with the numbers 7, 6, and 5, and we can see those are also earlier recorded in the book of Ezekiel. So here you can see the notes. The book of Ezekiel, year, month, and day show temple measurements. Now Ezekiel chapter 42 details the north and south chambers, which you can see here. And what you're looking at is in the middle is the temple. On the left side is the south chamber. On the right side is the north chamber. And he also describes a wall of 15 cubits. So at the top of the screen there are 2 walls of the 50 cubits. And here you can see he details the space also around the temple. So you got the temple building, and then there's a separate place that goes around the temple, and he describes the north chamber as being between the separate place, and the brown on the outside there is the pavement. So that's the pavement, and here we're getting an angle of the two buildings, and we have a pinkish hue to them because in Jeremiah 22 it says they were houses of vermilion. So there is actually a pinkish stone in Jerusalem. So we applied that kind of shading to the buildings to make a distinction from some of the other buildings. But here's the north chamber. It does have a door to the east. Okay, so the three levels that you see there, there's a door there, and there's another small door on the 100 cubit length. So 100 cubits is 200 feet. That's the length that you're looking at, and the width here is 50 cubits. That's a little over 100 feet. Okay, so this is the north chamber. Okay, and the three levels. Okay, when we look at it here, we're looking at the 100 cubits. If we cut the wall off, this is what it looks like inside. We call this the banqueting section, where the walls are painted white, and then there are tables that you can see. Okay, so we have long tables. The tables in here are 70 feet long, and each table seats 64 people. Okay, so we have the places where the priests will eat the meals, and the places where the priests will lay their garments. So we have another changing room. We actually have two of them. All right. And we have staircases. So we're here on the first floor, and this is the entrance of the first floor going up to the second floor. Here's the second floor staircase going up to the third floor, and here's the entrance or the exit of the third floor going up or down. On the three levels, you can see here. Okay, so that's the staircases. There's two of those, and there's a small door called the narrow door that Ezekiel describes. We have that underneath the staircase, and it's just 1 cubit wide passage to the outside. Here's the top with the roof removed, and you can see the area and space of the banquet. And here's the view, nice view from the outside, facing from the south, facing east. Okay, and here we can see the lattice section, and the feature here, of course, is the pillars. We're on the first floor in this view, and there's no tables. Once we get to the second floor, we have room for tables, so we have tables on the second and third floor. This is the second floor view of the tables and the large columns, wood columns, and now we're on the third floor. And the third floor, we have a little bit more space in the lattice area, and we have more tables and chairs. Okay, so this is what we call the lattice area of the woodwork and the wood panels of the house of the forest of cedar of Lebanon. Here's with the pillars removed what it looks like. Get a sense of, with the walls removed, what it looks like with just the tables. So, okay, that's just the tables, and that is the feature there of the internal. And here is the outside kitchen. And it said these are the places where they boil the meat from the sacrifices and they bake the bread. So we have outside kitchens. They are towards the west, which is towards the west of what you're looking at here. On the outside of the building. It could be on the inside, but our view is that there are places for the kitchens, and those places meaning places outside the building. Okay, so there are hearths, places to bake, boiling pots to boil the meat. Okay, so that is to the west of the building and the north chamber. Okay, the north chamber, isn't this exciting? It's also called the house of the forest of the cedar of Lebanon. And we don't have time, but basically Ezekiel chapter 42 gives us all the details of what we just showed you in the 3D model. All those details we get out of Ezekiel chapter 42. But for time's sake, what we're going to do is we're also going to talk about what is the story. What is the building telling us? What is it representing? Okay, well, clearly we could see the feature of the wedding supper. clearly displayed. The wedding supper of the Lamb, the great celebration. Blessed is he that sits at the table of the King in the wedding supper. So we had the table, we had the chairs. In the two sections, we had the white walls that are painted that we call the long tables, we call the banquet house, and then the other section we call the lattice with the woodwork. In the forest of cedar of Lebanon, the walls were wood panels. Okay, so we're combining the information we get from the first temple and also what we get with the Ezekiel. So Ezekiel takes many of the details, and those end up being applied to the millennial north chamber and south chamber. Of course, there's two buildings. And what is it that they're telling us? What is their story? There's the wedding supper. We showed you the kitchens. We showed you the big boiling pots and the hearths, the ovens that they use to bake. Okay, so they boil the sacrifices. They bake the bread. And of course, we're talking about one building with 2,400 people. Obviously, there would have to be larger kitchens than that, but we're just basically displaying to you what Ezekiel says. We're not trying to do what we think in our mind. We're trying to provide that information and accurately depict it in the 3D model. So we get the wedding supper. We get the tables, the chairs. We get the boiling pots. Okay, the great celebration of the Lamb. Okay, they bake the bread. All right, what we also see is we see the wedding supper theme in the first building as well. The house of the forest of cedar of Lebanon. All right, it also, when Solomon built it, he had the vessels. He had the vessels stored, the vessels of the cups and the bowls and the plates and many things for the vessels. They were stored in the house of the forest of cedar of Lebanon, meaning that the vessels placed there is a future fulfillment of, once again, the wedding supper of the Lamb. Where Christ said, I will not drink again of this cup until I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. Okay? And of course, that kingdom will be in the earth. Ezekiel's temple will happen. So there, it's the place where he stored the vessels. Now, Solomon also had an armory. So whenever we look at the wedding supper, we think of this great supper, but the wedding supper is always associated with war, with Armageddon-like scenes. Okay, of course, we see this in Revelation 19. Blessed are those that are called to the wedding supper, and then Christ on the white horse. Same thing with Hanukkah. Christ went into the house of force. He went into that in Hanukkah. Okay, and during Hanukkah, we also get the theme of the wedding supper, and we get the theme of Armageddon, apocalyptic scenes. Okay, they had to, the Maccabeans had to overcome the Antichrist figure, Antiochus Epiphanes. They had to overcome. They were not prepared to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, so they kept another feast, and that feast was Hanukkah. Christ celebrated Hanukkah in John 10 in the house of the forest of Lebanon, in Solomon's porch. Okay, and so they had this apocalyptic scene of war, and then they had the feast. Same thing with Esther. Esther had the decree of the Jews. The decree was reversed, but then they had to slay their enemies. Okay, so they had the decree verse to slay their enemies, Armageddon-like scenes. Then they kept the Feast of Purim, which is, of course, the wedding supper. So Solomon as well kept the house of forest cedar Lebanon as an armory. So you can see we got here shields. So these are the shields. I think they're like covers, maybe for the boiling pots, maybe something else. I'm not sure, but I saw these and I was like, these are shields. So what Solomon did is he built shields, fully gold shields, the whole thing, and stored them in the house of forest cedar Lebanon. Okay, so it was also known as an armory. It's clearly displayed in the scriptures, Isaiah 22, and elsewhere in Song of Solomon. So the armory, again, gives us the theme of Armageddon, gives us the theme of the war, taking place in association with the wedding supper. Okay, so we see the wedding supper first in Revelation 19. Okay, and we believe the shields. The shields are they have the shields on the white horses. All right, they have the shields of the foot soldiers. You know, it's the shield of faith in Ephesians chapter 6. Take unto you the whole armor of God. Okay, so those shields, those are stored in the house of forest cedar Lebanon. Okay, it was a little bit much to get, you know, that also as details in the 3D model. It takes a lot of bandwidth, more and more details you put into the model, and it slows down. But we will have that model available to you, okay? But we're very, very excited about this message, okay? And the other thing that we have about the story of the 3 floors and the 3 levels of the north and south chambers of the house, forest, cedar, Lebanon, Solomon's porch is humility, okay? He that is first shall be last, the last shall be first, okay? And so remember in the story in the wedding supper in Luke 14, Christ said, let me take forth this parable unto you. When you go to a feast, sit not in the highest room. Okay, sit not in the highest seat, in the highest floor, in the chief room. That's the highest in the house, okay? That's the upper room. All right, but lest someone else more honorable than you come and you sit down and you have to get up out of your seat and they take your seat. So don't present yourself as being honorable, even if you've been given the honor of rewards in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, have a humble attitude. Go to the lowest. I mean, my goodness, this is just amazing to be, you know, have the honor and opportunity of any of one of these places in the millennium. Okay, I think for most of us, we would just have to be there. We wouldn't be concerned about who sits anywhere. We're just, hey, we made it. But it's not just the idea of the feast and the wedding. It's the way we must carry ourselves all the time, not exalting ourselves, not exalting, oh, I'm a special person. God did this for me. All right. So that we clearly see in Luke 14. We also see that in Proverbs 25. In Proverbs 25, verse 7 says, put forth not yourself in the presence of the king. And again, it talks about the highest room, highest level. All right. In the presence of the prince. I'm not quoting that exact, but it's a clear reference to what the parable of Christ in Luke 14. So it's this, sit at the lowest table. Present yourself as the low degree and not high degree. Amen. So we have to have this mindset all the time of humility, being clothed in Christ. Okay. And meekness. Amen. So, wedding supper, the house of forest, Armageddon. All right. All of these things are associated with this building. Okay. We're very, very excited to share this with you. We do have videos that we had started on the Ezekiel Temple, going through the buildings and measurements and everything else, going back like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago approximately. And we started on this, so we do have some other videos where we got the measurement solid. We could see perfectly the order of the measurements of the first, second, third floor. Okay, first floor being 14 cubits, 12, 10. We know that order matches that of the temple. We could see that in the Ezekiel time. All right, so we know that we were confident of that, and we have other videos that explain more of the things that we're talking about in this video of the wedding supper, Hanukkah. You know, it's now the 9th month. We're in the month of Hanukkah. Christ went into Solomon's porch in Hanukkah. So guys, really excited to share this with you. In the description field of the video, we will have a link to the 3D model that you can click on, and you can take the time, you can go inside and see more of the details that we were unable to provide in this video. Even my devices are not fast enough to use the model because there's so much detail, there's so many chairs and things. It didn't work. Hopefully it works for you. But we'll have a link for that in the description field. You can click on that, just like we did for the gates. So if we're able to represent the internals of a building or structure, we'll also share that with you, where you can have the link, go inside and see what it looks like. Okay. So guys, very, very excited to share this with you. This is huge. And we hope to have more on the temple and the model coming up in future videos. So a voice came from the throne saying, "Praise our God, all you his servants that fear his name, both small and great."